Shahid Burki sir, Dr. Shahid Javed sir, and Dr. Saleem Mazhar. Thank you so much for spending your time and coming here to share your report and your ideas with our students. I got the chance to listen about the report in Chamber of Commerce meeting, where I requested Sindhu Sahib to also introduce the work Shahid Burki Institute is doing, as well as the report which they have developed last year, to discuss all these points with our students. So thank you so much, Dr. Stag, that you agreed to this and we arranged this discussion today. So today we will talk about the report on state of economy, changing world Pakistan research. In this report, they have talked about that how COVID pandemic has affected economy, society, and globally in general. So after the COVID pandemic, we have, although there are a lot of ill effects of this pandemic, but we have also learned very good things from this pandemic. And we knew that what are the healthy behaviors which we should adopt to be healthy. So if we have our healthy behaviors, then we can save ourselves from the health consequences of this pandemic. And I think one of the major things which we have learned, that we have to spend, in addition to curative medicine, we have to spend on preventive medicine. Because if we are not working for disease prevention and other kind of health problems prevention, then a major part of our economy will be spent on providing curative medicine, curative health services. So this was the, I think, major learning from the big lesson we have learned, that we have to spend on prevention, on preventive medicine. As well as we learned that how much we have to be prepared for such kind of pandemic in future. So this was, I think, one rehearsal, and how the world is changing because of globalization, urbanization, and modernization. Human population will face such kind of pandemic, but we learned that how we have to tackle consequences and issues related to the pandemic. So it's not only the consequences, we have learned some new things. And today, our team from Shahid Burki Institute, they will present the details of the report. And we also want that we can make academic and research collaboration with Shahid Burki Institute. And our students, they can have internship, because it's mandatory that our students, they have to do 6 to 8 weeks internship. So we would love if you can spare some places for our 10 to 15 students, and they can work with you during the summertime on issues, because all the issues on which you are working, these are very relevant to our institute's themes on which we are offering our BSDD program. So we hope that this collaboration will continue in future. I am very thankful that we are here. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, ma'am. I would now like to call Mr. Shahid Javed, who is the Vice Chairman of Burki Institute of Public Policy.
Assalamu alaikum everybody. I would first of all like to welcome you all to this report launch ceremony that we are organizing in your institute. We are indeed grateful to Dr. Rubeena Zakar for having given us this opportunity to come and present to you the one-year-long research work that we have done on this report. I, for one, representing BIPP is the Shahid Javed Burki Institute of Public Policy. I am enormously pleased that I am talking to the young girls and boys who are going to shape the future destiny of this country. And for me, again, it's a unique privilege to share thoughts, to share what we did, and to somehow present to you how valuable it is for Pakistan to embark upon what we call in the Institute as evidence-based policy making. And if we manage to communicate with you effectively, and you who are going to develop and determining the policy landscape of this country, I know that it is going to be immensely beneficial for the country, that we will move away from the traditional way of making policies as whims and caprices and the dreams of one man, and he would like that vision of development or the policy to be implemented without taking into consideration the evidence which ought to be there in order to ensure that the policy is responsive, it's pro-poor, and it is reflective of the collective preferences of the people. A development and a policy which does not reflect the yearning and the preferences of the people, for me, is no development at all. So again, it's absolutely amazing for me to sharing our experience with the young minds. We in the Shahid Javed Burki Institute of Public Policy are engaged in three basic parameters that we try to promote and advocate. One is introducing in this country a robust and evidence-based policy making. That is our first goal. And our report, they normally reflect the commitment that we have to introduce a robust and evidence-based policy making. Our second goal is somehow to facilitate and contribute towards institutions that are there in this country so that they start working on a sustainable paradigm. Because for policy implementation, you need robust institutions which are capable of translating that policy into reality. And the third thing, which is very dear to our heart, is contributing toward development of the leaders. And leaders at all levels, and especially the leadership with the youth and the young people of this country. And I would repeat myself, because we truly believe and sincerely believe that you have to shape and determine the destiny and the fate of this country. And if we want to have a prosperous Pakistan, a Pakistan which we bequeath to the posterity, which is resilient, which is sustainable, which is equitable, then we have to somehow unleash the potential of the youth of this country. Now, what we do is that each year we produce one report. And that report normally is about an issue of vital significance for the country, which has both national as well as the global significance of this country. Just to give you an example, our 2018-2019 reports were dedicated to China-Pakistan economic corridor. And you must have heard everywhere that it is going to be a game changer. Indeed, it's a game changer if we manage to harness the full potential of China-Pakistan economic corridor. And because that while we are reactive, we do not reduce it to simply a transit corridor. We industrialize our country, we become a part of the regional value chain and the global production network. Enormous resource that we have of agriculture in this country. So you can imagine that if we link up through CIPAC with the international market and come up with the right kinds of policy and institutional framework, it is going to contribute enormously to the development of this country. Our 2020 report was devoted to COVID-19 totally. Why? Because that was a very important issue which changed the entire dynamics of development and the living and the life of the throughout the world globally. This year report, again, we are talking about the changing world order and the need for Pakistan to reset and to be able to respond to the emerging geopolitical, geostrategic, geoeconomic reality. I'll not dilate upon or dwell upon the details of the report because there's a presentation and then Mr. Javed Burki is going to speak about it. But there are 3 or 4 things which I would like to underscore. One is that in this changing global order, if Pakistan has to play a lead role, and there is no reason Pakistan should not play a lead role, we need to reset our position and to be able to respond to the emerging geoeconomic, geopolitical realities to be able to contribute to regional and the global order. This is the first message that we have tried to convey. The second is that there is an enormous potential of China-Pakistan economic corridor. We have to fully harness that potential. And if you go in detail into the report, it provides you the development intervention to translate CIPAC into really development paradigm in this country. The third message which we have tried to encapsulate in this report is the role of science and technology. What a pity, and who knows better than you, the member of academia, that there is no connect between science, technology, practice, and development in this country. And what a pity that we don't have a national innovation technology system in Pakistan. And we advocate that there are 4 pillars which have to work in concert, in synergy: academia, government, the private sector, and the 4th, we have the sort of audacity to venture, and that is the army. These are the 4 different actors which have to work together in this country to fully benefit from the potential that is there for science and technology, and to be able to stimulate the growth, to be able to convert this country into a knowledge economy, and to be able to compete at the international level. And the 4th message that we have conveyed in this report is: look at Afghanistan, look at India, look at Iran, look at China, look at the global world order, and what needs to be done so that we manage to again respond to the challenges that we have in the vicinity. I again thank you very much for the opportunity that you have given to us. It's amusing to our ear that there is an offer from the Institute that they want to partner with us, which what means to us is that this youthful exuberance energy which will be available to us, and we will jointly work with you people to promote research evidence-based work in this country on various issues. We very warmly welcome this, and we look forward to concretizing it into reality. Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing this, sir. We really acknowledge the works of Burki Institute. Because of some unseen circumstances, Dr. Punjab Burki, who is ex-director of IPA Karachi, could not make it. So here we are going to present a recorded video which will highlight the state of economy in Pakistan.
My talk today is on the state of the economy at the end of the year, calendar year 2020. Pakistan finds itself in a curious position, reflecting both positive economic momentum and anxiety about the path ahead. During the past 18 months, significant progress has been made in coping with fiscal and external imbalances and in managing the health, social, and economic consequences of successive waves of the pandemic. The economy rebounded from negative growth in fiscal 20 to a provisional 3.9% growth in fiscal 21, while remaining within tight fiscal and monetary parameters. Nevertheless, the path to a sustained high growth trajectory remains uncertain. So I will review briefly the achievements of the past 2 years and then outline the challenges that lie ahead. First, managing the health consequences of COVID. So despite 4 surges since March 2020, Pakistan has escaped the worst aspects of the pandemic that many other countries, both developed and developing, have experienced. Our infection, hospitalization, and death rates from COVID have not been as high as one might have expected from a population of our size and from a public health system as weak as ours. The principal control instruments that have been used include selective lockdowns, quarantines, testing, contact tracing, masks, social distancing, and most recently vaccination. These measures were applied to varying degrees in different locations and time periods and appear to have been effective in avoiding mass breakouts and in allowing for a relatively rapid or quick resumption of economic activity. Nevertheless, vigilance continues to be called for as the coronavirus continues to evolve and mutate. While vaccination rates have improved over time, the current rate of 20% indicates that a large proportion of the population continues to be at risk. With regard to managing the social consequences of the pandemic, I would note that in the early months of the pandemic, in say spring of 2020, many were concerned about a possible substantial increase in social distress. In the event, these concerns were eased by the fast resumption of economic activity and substantial help provided to low-income groups. Such help has involved expanding the scope and generosity of the long-running Benazir Income Support Program of cash transfers to poor households, as well as emergency cash stipends offered to almost 15 million low-income households under the broader social protection initiative known as ISCS. The overall effort has drawn praise from international observers. No data are available yet to show how these measures have affected actual poverty trends, but there are strong reasons to believe that the consequences would have been much worse in the absence of these measures. Now, with regard to the immediate economic consequences of the pandemic, we know that the economic consequences have been less detrimental than initially feared. In fiscal 20, the GDP declined by a modest 0.5%, though a fall of as much as 1.5% had been expected. And preliminary data for the first 9 months of fiscal 21 show a strong rebound in industrial and service sector output, leading the authorities to predict a 3.9% growth for the full year. The recovery is attributable in part to accommodative monetary policy measures introduced by the government. These included loan deferments and rescheduling, low financing facilities, and a policy interest rate cut from 13.25% to 7% early on in the pandemic. The State Bank estimates that these liquidity support schemes had a cash flow impact of close to 5% of GDP. That is substantial. Recovery was also assisted by an improvement in in the external demand for Pakistan's exports and a rise in remittances. More recent monthly data suggest a resumption of pressures in such areas as inflation, the fiscal deficit, and the balance of trade. These are thought to be mostly related to the robust pace of economic activity, but also in part to a rise in commodity and oil prices. The official growth forecast for fiscal 22 remains at 5%. An agreement has also been reached now with the IMF. This should relieve some of the pressure on the economy, although it will impose burdens on citizens through the price of electricity, the collection of taxes, the rise in interest rates, and further depreciation of the rupee. Now, several longer-term issues are also relevant. I will discuss 3 such challenges: the public debt, private investment, and medium-term economic policy uncertainty. First, with regard to the public debt, both external and total public debt have risen sharply in recent years. The former from about 30% of the GDP in fiscal 18 to 42%, and the latter from 76% of GDP to 93% at the end of fiscal 21. Since then, the total debt actually appears to have climbed over 100% of GDP, according to some news reports. Is this sustainable? Some international analysis suggests that a 90% rate is a tipping point for most countries. While the medium-term framework of the IMF program shows both ratios declining over the next few years, this trend is contingent on assumptions that may prove to be too optimistic. Regarding external debt, if oil and gas prices spike in international markets, external borrowing needs will also spike. For Pakistan, as you know, energy imports are close to being non-discretionary. If exports do not increase as assumed because of weak growth in global markets or for some domestic reasons, similar pressures on borrowing could emerge. And then with regard to the overall public debt, if fiscal targets are not met due to policy slippage, domestic borrowing needs will arise, once again threatening sustainability. Now, with regard to private investment, the important thing to note is that while macroeconomic stabilization is important to prepare an economy for sustained growth, the growth itself must come from investment, especially private investment. This is an area of great concern for Pakistan because its private investment rate has stagnated at around 10% of GDP for the last 30 years, since 1990. To put the matter in perspective, consider that the private investment rate in India and Bangladesh, South Asian countries with comparable institutional context and facing similar external environments, has been more than twice as high. What accounts for Pakistan's stagnation, while neighboring countries have been so dynamic? Well, an important, though hard to measure, determinant of private investment is the availability of investment opportunities. Where opportunities are lacking, investors have little beyond real estate to put their money in. One could argue that such opportunities are more likely to arise in growing economies than in stagnant economies. And as you know, Pakistan's economy has stagnated at a relatively low average growth rate for the last 3 decades, making it difficult for investors to take an optimistic view of future prospects. What is clear is that variations in policy so far have not stimulated much of a response. Normally one would expect private investment to change in response to changes in monetary policy variables such as the supply of credit or the cost of credit. While these factors have fluctuated a lot over the past 30 years, they have not elicited any statistically significant and sustained response in investment. So the reasons for Pakistan's investment stagnation may lie in more complex areas. First, it is possible that Pakistan's security history of the last 4 decades has discouraged investors. Constant tensions on its borders and a fraught domestic security environment with periodic incidents of terrorism and crime may have led many to believe that it was safer to invest abroad than domestically. Now, recent developments in Afghanistan resulting in the assumption of power by the Taliban do not as yet have clear implications for the trajectory of security in Pakistan. Second, Pakistani citizens have had the legal ability, on and off since the early 1990s, to convert rupees into foreign currencies without significant restrictions. This may have encouraged them to move funds offshore when confronted by even modest domestic security risks. A little bit more now on the third reason, which is uncertainty about medium-term policy. When this report was being prepared, there was uncertainty about whether or not the government would continue to adhere to the ongoing IMF program. That uncertainty has been lifted by a new agreement a few weeks ago. So we can be confident about the stance of economic policy for the next 6 months or so, maybe even a year. But then what happens after that? Will there be pressure to abandon the program and live with a higher level of public spending, lower revenue collection, looser monetary policy? This is normal for a democratic country coming up to elections, for example. But it does raise longer-term concerns. Pakistan has undertaken adjustment programs with the IMF at the average rate of 1 every 3 years since 1990. It has abandoned all but one of these programs mid-course, making political choices to not persist with fiscal austerity and not pursue structural reforms in the face of resistance from vested groups. Such policy instability may have persuaded investors to consider policy changes in Pakistan as being short-term in nature and likely to be reversed or modified in a few years. Such a mindset discourages long-term investment. So let me just conclude by saying that previous governments have committed to various medium-term reform objectives and targets and specific measures as well. But they have failed to deliver or chosen to abandon the policy programs. Will the current government deliver? Thank you.
We highly appreciate Dr. Farooq's effort. Now I would like to call Ms. Amal, who is Research Fellow at BIPP, to address key policy issues and recommendations.
Ladies and gentlemen, first of all, I thank all of you on behalf of the Shahid Javed Burki Institute of Public Policy to this August gathering of intellectual discourse, intellectual honesty and debate. Knowing that I have been in your seats, your shoes once, I know how tedious and sometimes difficult it becomes to sit through a seminar or a presentation. So don't worry, I empathize with you. Making it brief as well as knowledgeable and valuable I will try to deliver a very concise set of knowledge in front of you. Let's begin now. So as you can see, this is our 14th annual report, and it is titled as State of Economy, Changing World and Pakistan Reset. So what this means is that the entire focus of our research for the last 1 year has been on this domain. It revolves around the changing world and Pakistan reset, and how Pakistan needs to position itself, reorient itself in the wake of certain external and internal shocks. So I'll take you through the sequence of this presentation. A little bit of theme, I'll just discuss it with you, then I'll introduce you to the authors and the contributors for this research, and then we have some summary of some recommendations will be shared with you. So, looking into the theme of this report, as I just mentioned, that the world in itself is going through tectonic shifts, be it political, ideological, social, political, you name it. So in those circumstances and in those scenarios, we see that there has been an evolving geopolitical situation and the world is facing a reset itself. Now, that is characterized primarily by China's growing influence not only globally but regionally as well. Not only politically but ideologically as well. Having said that, one should also couple the influence and the changes that are going on in Afghanistan, ideologically and politically, socially as well. So those things are covered under the evolving geopolitical world order. Then we have another reality that has struck us, that is the post-COVID-19 world now. These dictates that I just mentioned, they are against in the backdrop of a highly competitive world. Now that competitive world is again marked by what? Two things. A very rapid technological advancement going on in the milieu, and the severity of climate change that one cannot ignore even if we want to. So this mandates a very proactive response for Pakistan. Rather, not only a proactive response that needs to be taken, but a very creative one, so that Pakistan, being the 5th most populous country of the world, with one of the highest youth populations in the world, needs to contribute and reorient itself to play a more solid part in making the world a rather more equitable place. So, what kind of analysis has been done in this report? Of course, it's evidence-based, as Mr. Najam has just mentioned. We have tried to capture the situation of Pakistan, the economic pathway that Pakistan needs to follow. In the midst of COVID-19, what has been the national and the global impact that has shaped Pakistan and or has given Pakistan an opportunity to go or see the way forward. Then we have the science and technology, how to build Pakistan into an innovative and a technology-friendly country. Agriculture and food nexus have been explored, and plus the geopolitical developments were discussed with China's rise and the Afghanistan riddle that I briefly mentioned. So the next slide. Please see that our main authors are the following. All of them have had a very lustrous career with the national and international organizations in their own right. Coming towards the meaty part of the presentation, of the report rather. So the key findings that we had in the report were, during our research, as I just mentioned, Pakistan is the 5th most populous country of the world. Not only that can be treated as our strategic advantage. But there is another thing, that Pakistan is the 5th largest population with a median of 23.8 years, which means the maximum number of people over here are 24 years old, which means we can easily which means, because Pakistan is a very, very youthful country in that sense, which means that we can very easily have a demographic dividend if we focus our policies and our social and our strategic interests in the favor of the youth. Pakistan can hence become one of the Asian tigers, just like Singapore, Hong Kong, Taiwan, etc., and can be termed as a village economy like some of the ASEAN nations have already been. So what do we recommend in this case? Because we have such a population, we recommend that our public policy should be focused on harnessing the youth assets. Now, how can that be done? We have identified two parts, two ways to do it. One is to create an ecosystem that is so conducive to make your small and medium enterprises come alive and be sustainable. And number two is to have information technology and innovation culture so robustly within the roots of Pakistan that we are already automatically become on the path to technological advancement. We also need to engage diaspora, something that Mr. Shahid Javed Burki may discuss with you later on, that our diaspora in the developed world, in the European and the North American continents, they can definitely contribute in this regard. Plus, the role of political leadership to inspire people cannot be ignored by any means. Coming towards COVID-19. So we see that COVID-19 management has been a success story in Pakistan. According to this Economist magazine, Pakistan was rated as third globally behind the Hong Kong and New Zealand. Well, Pakistan, yes, it did well. However, now the ranking has changed. Why? You can see the recent situation in Hong Kong post the new variant of COVID. Still, we cannot say that we have achieved much in this regard. Why? Because we need to be vigilant no matter what. We need to ensure that in the face of evolution of variants, we are also following the SOPs and all the, as ma'am mentioned, that some of the healthy behaviors have to be adopted in order to keep Pakistan on a sustained route to recovery after COVID. One thing has been seen on a global level, that there has been a lack of effective response towards COVID. Now, why is it? Is it only because of the lack of preparedness plans on the part of the multilateral organizations or on the part of the governments? Or is it also because of some of the slow and cumbersome, indecisive pandemic alert systems that the countries have had on their own? In this case, what we recommend is that not only the vaccinations need to be made mandatory, but also certain surveillance systems should be made in place so that your development, your vaccine, your immunology, all these things have to be can be developed. Your social policy should be tailored in such a way that all these things are addressed. Public health policy and planning requires urgent and far-sighted attention. One important aspect that I forgot to mention was the advocacy of culture of civic responsibility. You and I, in our individual selves, are going to make a robust system, not only for the province, but for Pakistan by extension. This is something very interesting, something that we found out, that how have not only some marginalized and alienated sections of Pakistan been affected, there are some other factors that are also contributing towards the widening inequality. First of all, let me just identify that marginalized section. We are talking about women. Now, all of you who are studying gender studies would understand the need to address the socio-economic inequality that women face in this in many developing countries. So why is it happening? Because COVID has exacerbated the problems of loss of income, inequalities, diminution of access to health and education, also access to public health. All these things are causing such problems for women. In this case, we recommend that if the emergency cash transfers होने चाहिए, there should be expanded family and child benefits for vulnerable women. There should be support for women so that they can prosper while engaging in the women-owned businesses. Agri-businesses are one of them, e-commerce is one of them, all these things. There should be implementation of gender-responsive social protection systems that is going to bridge not only the inequality gap, but also the gender pay gap. Now some other very, very key areas that are the focus of public policy that have been affected by COVID the most. They are as follows in front of them: health, education, income, and employment. So in Sabko, how can they be tackled now? First of all, globally, if we see, there has been a provision of COVAX system where COVAX has been made in order to ensure that there is an equitable distribution of vaccination all around the world, not ignoring the least developed countries like Africa, some of the regions in the Middle East, and obviously in Asia. Secondly, we have to prepare an IT-driven education system. We should be ready for the future. That should be accessible and affordable, most importantly, for all the strata in the society. Your multilateral organizations, their part to be played cannot be ignored or diminished. For example, UN, World Bank, other multilateral donors, they have to implement the SDGs of 2030. Otherwise, it would still be a dream that is not going to come true. We also need to stimulate the digital economy and e-commerce culture and ecosystem in Pakistan. So some findings in this case have also been like that around 105 million people have faced acute food insecurity at the crisis level, etc. Plus 183 million people have faced a stress level of acute food insecurity, because there are just different levels of food insecurity. Plus a nexus has been found out that if one thing is affected, how another thing as a result is affected by COVID. Those variables are health, food, and lifestyle. If one thing is affected, the other is automatically affected. So in this case, the ambitious climate recovery commitments have to be made. Transformational action has to be taken, where a more nutritious, plant-based diet and reduced global emissions action plan has to be made. We have to move on from global to regional and local, smarter, efficient, climate-smart value chains. That is the need of the hour. Then, practices that take into account the production of food, health, and climate change in nexus at the same time, those have to be adopted. And most importantly, we need to use the cost-effective digital technology for much-needed innovation in food production, healthcare, and to limit the carbon emissions and their negative effects. As you had just been mentioned that Pakistan has lagged behind in the science and technology sector. As Military Sahab had just said, that what a pity when it comes to science and technology in Pakistan. This is something we have also identified and addressed in our report. Our failure started in the after 1970s, when the role of National Council of Science and Technology became almost negligible in the development of Pakistan. We also saw the lack of integration between different actors. For example, could be your academia, your industry, and your business community. This is what we are proposing. That's something that has not been in place, should be in place right now, to build an innovative Pakistan. Also, as we talked about the evolving geopolitical situation, I said that it is being characterized by two factors. One is China's global rise, and the other is the uncertainty in Afghanistan's socio-political, cultural, economic landscape at the moment. So we are going to discuss that now. Although, without a doubt, CPEC is a game changer, but how can we really make it one? China has so far pledged us investment of around rather more than 40 billion and has told us to create an atmosphere where employment can become possible. But in that sense, what we need to do, Pakistan should join the Chinese economic orbit, given China's ascendance on the global economic landscape. So all the students of international relations and international political economy may take interest here. Trade links with regional markets to improve infrastructure and streamline transit and logistics need to be explored. Pakistan has to become an integral part of the regional trade value chain, number one, and number two, in order to enhance its footprint in the regional markets. And then exports and outputs in industrial and agricultural sectors have to be sine qua non. Why? Because that is what, again, is the need of the hour. Okay, finally Afghanistan. So Afghanistan, whatever happened in Afghanistan, we could easily analyze that US's knee-jerk reaction, it seems like a knee-jerk reaction done without much thought. Its withdrawal is something like that from Afghanistan, and it has shown us that the country has further plunged into turmoil and uncertainty, and something that we can't know how much longer it will going to last. However, some opportunities in Kabul have already been seen and identified. For example, Afghanistan may become part of the Quad that is in the making. Also, there is a problem that Pakistan may become the frontline target of the PTP threats. History has shown us that. In such uncertain and precarious circumstances, we have recommended that there is a need for greater political and social tolerance that shows inclusivity to bring the positive peace in Afghanistan. So again, a concept of international relations, it's not that we are talking about peace only, we are talking about positive peace over here. Then we have flexible and accommodative policy that needs to be made for accommodating the Afghan refugees who settle not only in the US and European countries, but even if there's an inflow into Pakistan, there has to be something in place, a framework in place to accommodate them, so that Pakistan does not suffer as it did in the past. Then we have that Afghanistan may become partner in the Asian Quad, as I just mentioned, and that acquainted with Turkey, Pakistan, Iran, and China. So, ladies and gentlemen, this was it from my side for the report and the summaries and the recommendations. I hope that we've gathered something out of this. Thank you.
Thank you, Eamon. So this was an interesting and precise description of the report. We would like to welcome all the guests that arrived moving forward. Dr. Uzma Kardar and Ms. Umbreen, we welcome you to this session. Now we will proceed to the question and answer session. So if you have any queries, then please feel free to ask. Mike,
Hello, Assalamu alaikum. मेरा नाम शौकत अली है सर. मेरा जो सवाल है आप साथ के सामने जो सर है उससे आपसे है सर. आपने कहा सर चाइना पाकिस्तान इकोनॉमिक कॉरिडोर है वो पाकिस्तान की जो मुस्तकबिल को डिटरमाइन करेगा, लेकिन सर मैं इससे आपसे बिल्कुल डिसएग्री करता हूँ, क्योंकि इसी सीपे की वजह से जो गिलगित बल्तिस्तान में जितने जो ग्लेशियर्स हैं वो मुकम्मल तौर पर जो अपनी एक्सिस्टेंस जो होने में तैयार है. इसके साथ साथ सर पाकिस्तान की जो इलेक्ट्रॉनिक इंडस्ट्री है वो भी जो है इस सीपे की वजह से मुकम्मल तबाह होने के जाने पे. तो सर आप कैसे कह सकते हैं कि ये पाकिस्तान की जो
सारे क्वेश्चन रहते हैं कि
this effect is not going to be a game changer because it has detrimental environmental qualities that are in the shape of glaciers rather than
Before I answer the question or reply to the observation you have made, let me say a couple of things about this report. You have already heard a great deal about its content. I just want to give you a bit of history. This is the 14th report The first one appeared in 2007. We decided to write these reports after I had a discussion with, I'm sure you know the name, Shahid Javed. He was at that time Vice-Chancellor of Beacon House National University, but he had also worked at the Planning Commission as Deputy Chairman and Finance Minister and so forth. And just to give you the context, I have lived almost my entire life outside Pakistan. But I have never lost interest in the country. I have written about a dozen books about Pakistan. And during one of the visits, Shahid Javed said to me that unfortunately the ability to do serious policy work in the government is no longer there. And therefore we should do something in the private sector. And he asked me if I would set up an institution called Institute of Public Policy in Lahore, associated with BNU, since he was then the Vice-Chancellor of BNU. And one thing we talked about was that every year we will produce a report. I served at the World Bank for 26 years. A couple of years after joining the bank, I and a fellow economist from Pakistan, Mehboob-ul-Haq, we suggested to the bank management that the bank should do a report every year on the state of the global economy. And in addition to that, the bank should do a special about state of the economy, and in addition to this, the bank should write about one specific subject on which it had done research. So we decided to follow the same pattern in producing our reports. The report that you are seeing today has a fair amount of coverage about the state of the economy, but it has picked up 2 or 3 subjects which are related to the economy, but are happening outside Pakistan, but are relevant for Pakistan. You already heard about the Afghanistan situation. The world is changing rapidly. We were affected by COVID-19, but not as badly as some other countries, particularly India and so forth. So in the last 14 years or so, we have covered a variety of subjects. We have written about poverty, we have written about the Chinese investments in Pakistan, we've written about why South Punjab has been left behind so much compared to other parts of Punjab. We've written about the 18th Amendment, and so on and so forth. So this pattern will continue in the future, and next year we hope to write about the role women can play, should play, and should be allowed to play in transforming Pakistan from what it is today to what it could become tomorrow and day after. Since I have, as I said, lived practically my entire life outside the country, I noticed some things that probably are not noticed by people who live in the country. And one of them is there has been a loss of confidence in Pakistan, about Pakistan's future. This is very, very unfortunate. We should work to change that. And in that context, I just mentioned an episode. I visited India several times, and in one of those visits, I was invited to meet with L.K. Advani, who was the Deputy Prime Minister, and Mr. Vajpayee, who was the Prime Minister but by then they had left their jobs. So when I went to see Advani, he said to me, there's a lot to talk about and I have kept 2 hours for you. But let me make an observation before we start the conversation. The observation is that we Indians love India. You Pakistanis don't like Pakistan. That kind of shook me up. And I said, why do you say that? And he said, you know, we have a lot of differences amongst ourselves in India, but when we meet foreigners, when we are outside India, we speak with one voice, and that is not the case with Pakistanis. He said, the way you have come to see me, Pakistanis come to see me, and I test what they feel about their country by saying something negative about Pakistan, a little bit of negative stuff about Pakistan. And people who are visiting me from Pakistan go 10 paces ahead of me and start criticizing the country even more than I would have dared. The point I'm making is that for some reason there is a loss of confidence in the country's future. That is very, very unfortunate. We have to recognize that Pakistan has a tremendous future. Pakistan has a number of positives about it, which we should exploit in order to develop. Some of those have been mentioned already. I can add more to what you have heard. But in that context, I believe that women have a very important role to play in developing Pakistan both economically and socially. And considering that, we have decided to make that the main subject of our report due next year. As has been indicated, there have been a lot of changes outside Pakistan that affect Pakistan, and we should recognize this. The previous speaker talked about our 4 neighbors, Afghanistan, China, India, and Iran, and all of them have different problems which in a way affect Pakistan also. And we should recognize what is happening in these countries and why we should study their situation and then see how we can either make use of their difficulties or make sure that those difficulties don't come to us. I think this is my second time I've come to this room. And the first time was about 4 or 5 years ago when the director, when the chairman of sociology department invited me to address the students in his department. And he asked me to speak about the comparative economic models of China, India, and Pakistan. And I know these 3 countries very well because of my career at the bank. I was for 8 years director of China operations, World Bank's China operations. So I did this. The interesting thing was there is one difference today which I noticed. Last time I came over here, the front rows were occupied by girls, the back rows were occupied by boys. And when I stopped talking, and I've noticed this over and over again in Pakistan, serious questions were asked by girls, non-serious questions were asked by boys. And to me that shows that Pakistani women are better than Pakistani men. And it's great to have at one point there were 3 women, but now there are 2 over here. So that's something very, very important. We had what's it called, a webinar the other day, and at which I spoke, and a couple of women spoke, and one of them said that there is lack of confidence amongst women, and that puzzles me. Maybe it's the environment in which we provide, in which women have to live and do their work and so on, which results in a loss of confidence. Women should have full confidence in their ability because they have tremendous amount of ability. One thing, not one thing, 3 or 4 things that one notices about Pakistani situation which is different from the rest of the world. One is, the previous speaker talked about the demographic situation in Pakistan and said that we have a very young population. We have the youngest one of the youngest population in the world. Only 2 or 3 countries in Africa have populations younger than ours. But we are also different in one respect. In almost all countries, women live longer than men. Their life expectancy is higher than that of men, which means that the ratio of women in the population of these countries is higher than the ratio of men. Pakistan is an exception. In Pakistan, there are fewer women than men. Why is that the case? Several reasons. And one is that basic information, basic education is not provided to women which can save them from serious diseases and so on and so forth. And therefore, there are a lot of deaths among women that can be avoided. One simple example I'll give you. Water is a major source of illness in a country such as Pakistan. When I was working on China, China also, in those days, now it has improved a lot, had serious health problems. So the health department in the World Bank told me that when you travel in the rural areas in China and they offer you water in bottles, always drink from the water. Never put water in the glass that they will give you, because you have no idea in what kind of water the glass was washed in. So when I was served in her office water in glasses, I opened the bottle and I drank from the bottle rather than put it in. So these are simple things, but these have to be taught, these have to be indicated. I used to spend a fair amount of, not a fair amount, I used to spend about 4 to 6 weeks every year in Singapore, working at Institute of South Asian Studies. And there, once I was given a research assistant who was Bangladeshi. And he said to me that there is a lot of data available about South Asia with 2 professors who work at Harvard University. And would you like me to take a look at that data and provide you with some tabular information, make tables? So what is it that you would like to get out of this data? I said to him, give me the data on the proportion of girls attending schools, primary schools, and proportion of girls completing their primary education in Pakistan, India, and China. Pakistan, India, and Bangladesh. So a few days later, he brought the tables. I looked at the table and I was very surprised. Pakistan was doing better in these 2 areas, proportion of girls attending primary school and proportion of girls completing primary education. It was higher than India and Bangladesh. And it was unbelievable. So I said to him, have you checked this with the Harvard people? And he said, I had done that, and they said to me that your numbers are correct, your calculations are correct. Then I said to him, compare what's happening in the public sector and the private sector. And he came back a few days later with the information that Pakistan's private sector was doing much better in educating girls than the public sector. And in private sector, women teachers were the predominant providers of education. And he said that he had looked at the data which suggests that women, even with 8 to 10 years of education, living in villages, provide a room, just designate a room as a school, and children attend them. So there is a lot of that kind of activity going on. So essentially what I'm saying is that we should look at the positives in Pakistan, prepare ourselves to make use of those positives, develop confidence in the country's future, stop criticizing the country without realizing that if we don't have confidence in ourselves, the world will not have confidence in us. So it is important that we take another serious look at where we are and where we could go if the right kind of policies were to be adopted. The person who asked a question about China has left, but let me just talk about China. We did a report. In fact, we have done 2 or 3 reports on CPEC, China-Pakistan Economic Corridor. And as Shahid Javed said in his speech, that we concluded that China's involvement in Pakistan is a game changer. It has taken a long time for Pakistan to come to the conclusion that China is a reliable partner. China has interest in developing Pakistan, not because it thinks Pakistan should be developed, because the developed Pakistan is a tremendous advantage for China itself. When I was working on China, one prime minister said to me that we have been telling Pakistanis to let us build a corridor from the western part of China to the port of Gwadar, but we are getting no response from Pakistan. Ultimately, a response came and resulted in China-Pakistan Economic Corridor. It is a game changer. Now, this person, when he asked the question, expressed some skepticism about this. And in this context, I want to tell you what the Chinese ambassador to Pakistan told me after we had presented one of our earlier reports. He was in the audience and he said to me if I could have lunch with him. So I had lunch with him. And he said to me, there is one problem that Chinese companies are facing, and they are not coming to Pakistan as much as we would like. And the problem is that what was alluded in the question that was asked, that there is a feeling in Pakistan that Pakistan is losing out rather than winning by associating itself with Pakistan. And he said one reason for this is that a lot of newspapers carry stories and articles of the harm that could be done to Pakistan by China. And he said there is also coverage, negative coverage on television. And he said to me, you know why that is happening? That is happening because these articles are written in India, and then they were given to Pakistanis who were prepared to sign their name and have them published as their articles in the newspapers. He also said that there are some TV anchors who are in the Bay of India, and India really wants to discourage Chinese activities in Pakistan. When, as I said, I used to do some work every year in Singapore, I used to meet a lot of Indians And almost invariably, there was tremendous amount of hostility amongst these Indians, and they would come either from the academia or from the government about Pakistan. They really disliked Pakistan, and they would do anything to hurt us. And we should protect ourselves rather than promote that kind of activity from India. I will stop over here, and I'll be very happy to answer questions. I have to tell you that I'm very hard of hearing, so if you ask a question, I'm going to ask him to just indicate to me what is being said.
But can I add a little bit? Specific to the question which was addressed about the climate change, and implicit in that was that it is because of Stag that the glaciers are melting. Well, I'll not comment. I'll encourage you to kindly look at the causes of what is impacting and what is changing the climate. And that you would find that Stag absolutely has no role or no contribution to worsening the situation. Insofar as Gilgit and Baltistan is concerned, we have written, fortunately, the agriculture policy, this institution that I am representing. There is an enormous potential. Instead of bewailing and bemoaning, look at the production system which is there, Gilgit, Baltistan. Look at the demand which is emerging in Karachi, in the western part of China. Now, if we as a nation, as a government, as a country, have not been able to put together our act, why should we externalize the blame on the Chinese? Why can't we have the right kind of policies, institutions and programs to give stimulus to the economic activity in Baltistan and the beautiful, huge amount of fruits and vegetables that you grow over there? Why can't we attract the Chinese market? And that is how we say that game changer, Stag is game changer. And the most benefit which is going to accrue apart from other parties is to Gilgit and Baltistan. And again, can we become a part of the value chain in terms of supplying whatever is required in agriculture, food and nutrition, fruits and vegetables by China? If we do not harness this potential, why should we blame Stag? And again, I would say that it has got nothing to do with the climate change. Who in your universities are scholars and experts, they will also tell you that the change of climate that is happening in the world, Pakistan is only contributing 0.8% to the overall contribution that we are making in terms of the greenhouse gases emission.
So,
thank you so much, sir. You have thoroughly discussed the question.
सवाल Rahman, ISCS से हूँ, बलूचिस्तान है। सवाल है मेरा कि चाइना पाकिस्तान इकोनॉमिक कॉरिडोर 2015 से जैसे स्टार्ट हुई, इन्होंने 15 साल के लिए मतलब अपने काम कंप्लीट होने के लिए कहा है। इसमें उन्होंने पहले $50 बिलियन का किया, लेकिन 2017 में उन्होंने दोबारा इसको $64 बिलियन पे पहुंचाया। लेकिन अब सवाल दो है यहाँ पर, एक पाकिस्तान पर्सपेक्टिव में है, एक प्रोविंशियल पर्सपेक्टिव में। जो पाकिस्तान पर्सपेक्टिव में है वो ये है कि यहाँ पे $35 billion in the form of FDI है। अब FDI सारी यहाँ पे 95% जो FDI है या MNCs अगर काम कर रहे हैं वो चाइना की है, लेबर भी चाइना की है, इंजीनियर्स भी चाइना के हैं, स्किलफुल जो एक्सपर्ट हैं वो भी चाइना की है। यहाँ जो भी मतलब हमें जो प्रॉफिट मिलता है, हमें तो प्रॉफिट किसी भी सूरत में, क्योंकि लेबर और जो एक्सपर्ट है या जो इंजीनियर है वो सारी चाइना के हैं, तो ये कैसे हमारे लिए एक गेम चेंजर होगा। ये तो अब IMF के साथ साथ हम चाइना पे भी हमारी इकोनॉमी डिपेंड हुई, पहले सिर्फ IMF पे थी, अब तो हम चाइना के कंट्रोल में भी आ गए। और दूसरा सवाल ये है कि प्रोविंशियल लेवल पे अगर हम देखा जाए इसको, बलूचिस्तान एक डिस्क्रिमिनेशन की तरफ जा रहे हैं, चूंकि यहाँ मेरे पास एक स्टेटिस्टिक है, अब तो मैं शो नहीं करवा सकता हूँ, लेकिन मैं सिर्फ इसको बोल देता हूँ कि 2 महीने पहले एक गवादर के अंदर एक मूवमेंट भी चली थी हिदायतुल्लाह की सरबराही में। वहाँ की 3 मेजर इश्यूज हैं कि वहाँ की लोगों की जो रोजगार है वो सिर्फ माइग्रेट है, फिशिंग पे है, अगर उसकी वहाँ पे फेंसिंग लगाया जा रहा है, वहाँ पे कबाड़ लगाया जा रहा है, उन लोगों की ये माइग्रेट जो है वो डिस्टर्ब होती है। और दूसरी तरफ वहाँ के लोकल को बिल्कुल डिस्ट्रीब्यूट कर दिया गया है, रोक दिया गया है कि वो अपने रोजगार से। स्टेटिस्टिक है यहाँ पे प्रोविंशियल शेयर इन इकोनॉमी पोवर्टी, प्रोविंशियल शेयर इन द 7th NFC अवार्ड में है। बलूचिस्तान के जो है हिस्सा है प्रोविंशियल शेयर इन मल्टी डायमेंशनल पोवर्टी में है, इसका बलूचिस्तान का 10% है। और इसी तरह प्रोविंशियल शेयर इन इकोनॉमी में बलूचिस्तान का जो पोर्शन है वो 9% है, और प्रोविंशियल शेयर इन द 7th NFC अवार्ड में इसका 4.35% है। तो इसका मतलब है यहाँ पे भी एक डिस्क्रिमिनेशन है, और ओवरऑल एक रीजनल पर्सपेक्टिव में भी पाकिस्तान के लिए कोई फायदा नहीं है।
I'll ask Shahid Javed also to come in response to what you have said. But we must understand where China is today in the world and where China is going to be in the next 5 to 10 years. When I started working, the first time I visited China was in 1965. And it looked like a country which was more backward than Pakistan. There was absolutely nothing modern, not even the airport was better than that of Pakistan. Then when I started working on China for the World Bank, that was in 1987, I just couldn't recognize the country that I had seen 22 years earlier. And during my time working on China at the World Bank, enormous amount of development took place. I don't know if you realize that in 1980, when China decided to open up to the world, at that time, China was totally shut down. The world was not invited to partner China in the process of development. But in 1980, German Deng Xiaoping decided to open the thing. From 1980 to the year 2008, the Chinese economy expanded 32 times. And Chinese per capita income increased 25 times. There is absolutely no example of this kind of growth anywhere in human history than what happened in China during this 25 to 30 year period. China today is the second largest economy after the United States. 5 years from now, China will be the largest economy in the world. It would have overtaken the United States. Why? Because its rate of growth, even today, after having slowed down from about 10 to 12% a year to around 4 to 5% a year, is considerably higher than that of the United States. Chinese industry has changed. It no longer produces labor-intensive goods, it produces high-technology goods. So much so that one of the companies that has a very large presence in Pakistan, Huawei, has been banned in the United States because the US cannot compete with Huawei and what Huawei does in terms of producing cheap telephones and so forth. We need China because China will provide us access to the areas that are landlocked. I used to be a member of something called the Astana Club, which was a group of about 30 people that met in the capital of Kazakhstan. At that time it was called Astana, now they've changed the name to after the former president of the country. And one person who was a member of that group, a very well-known American economist, he said to me at one point, and he said, do Pakistani realize that if they use the port of Gwadar, which the Chinese are developing, to link up with the landlocked countries of Central Asia and Afghanistan, it would be enormously beneficial, not only for those landlocked countries because they would gain access to the sea through Gwadar, but also to Pakistan, because it would become the entrepot for these countries. He said that his view was that if Pakistan does what China would like it to do, Gwadar will be one of the world's greatest ports, importing and exporting more stuff than almost any other country, any other port in Asia, but also compared to some of the larger ports in the world. China is also going through demographic change, as is the case with most of developed countries. Its population is now growing at less than 0%, which means it is not, its population is declining. It is an aging country. But because it is technologically advanced so much, it needs young people, it needs youth to keep its industries in the sector of technology, in healthcare, in education, and that Pakistan could provide. We have already mentioned that Pakistan is one of the younger populations. There is a company over here in Lahore, which is definitely the largest IT company in Pakistan, called NetSol. And I have been telling those people that they now employ about 1,000 people in Lahore and several other areas in the world. That train your people to work in China and to fill the gap, demographic gap that the Chinese have now begun to feel. So let's not be suspicious of China. Let's look objectively at China and gain whatever we can by associating ourselves closely with China. I live in Washington. I've lived in Washington for more than 50 years. And I'm telling you, one of the most disliked countries in Washington is Pakistan. Americans have absolutely no respect for this country.
Yes.
They really do not want to see Pakistan making much progress.
Yes.
There are many reasons for that. One of the reasons is that the Indian diaspora and Indian presence in the United States is now very, very pronounced. And as I said before, Indians don't like Pakistan, and they would like to damage Pakistan as much as they can. And this diaspora is now working against Pakistan. Imran Khan has been complaining that Biden has not called him. He's called every other major leader in the world. And the reason is that some of the people who are closest to Biden are from India, and they are discouraging him to have any association with Pakistan, which is stupid on the part of the United States, considering what's happening in Afghanistan. They need Pakistan. They need to support Pakistan, build Pakistan to make sure that Afghanistan's 40 million people don't starve to death and so on and so forth. But that's not happening, whereas China is prepared to go. I once wrote an article, I don't know if you read the stuff I put out in the newspapers. I write a column every week for Express Tribune. And in that article I said that the Americans are supporting what's called the Quad, Q-U-A-D. This is something that was proposed by one of the former prime ministers of Japan. And this is 4 countries, Japan, Australia, United States, and India. And in that article I proposed that let's work towards a counter-Quad made up of China, Pakistan, Afghanistan, Iran, and possibly make it a 5-thing Turkey. So we have to think through these kinds of challenges that we face, but I am very, very positive about Pakistan's economic future if we have the ability to adopt the right set of policies and also change our attitude about being negative about this country and being very despondent about its future to something positive and something more hopeful that lies in the future.
More specifically to your question, a couple of observations which I would like to make before responding directly to your question. One is that it's a source of inspiration and encouragement that you are articulating the felt grievances of Balochistan. And the speaker before you, the student who asked us about the Gilgit-Baltistan. This in itself is very vibrant and speaks eloquently of the need to look at the issues of regional disparity, of death, disease, discrimination, disempowerment, and disengagement of the people. So thank you very much. And I would encourage you to continue raising these voices. But again, as Burki Saab said, let us be constructive, let us be positive about Pakistan. That is my first observation. My second observation, that we take pride, and genuine pride, that we are independent, non-profit, objective institute. We do not represent any interest. We do not represent government policy. What we do is based on objective analysis of the situation. So what I'm going to tell you is what we proposed to the government when it came to Sipak and Balochistan. We advocated very vociferously and very strongly in our 2018 report that you should give priority to the construction of the Western Corridor. Not to the Eastern Corridor or not to the Central Corridor. But if you have to get rid of a sense of deprivation, exclusion, ostracization, and isolation in Balochistan, in KPK, and then FATA, you have to provide this opportunity of Sipak to people from those areas. And what we proposed was a local production system-based intervention. We looked at Gwadar, we looked at Turabat, we looked at Kila Saifullah, probably that is, whatever, we looked at Kharan, we looked at all the most backward areas of Balochistan, and we identified the potential which was there for government of provincial as well as the national to harness and then transform this power, the deprivation, the kind of income generation for the people over there. So, and we still maintain that if
when we are implementing this CPAC, if we implement this CPAC in consultative and inclusive way with more emphasis on the production economic aspects, apart from the infrastructure and energy. It is the agriculture, the industry, the industrial zone. We even propose to the government that the government need to establish economic hubs in Turbat, in Kharan, in all those areas which are, I'm sorry, I can't recall those, but there were 7-8 specific nodes that we have suggested, essentially to emancipate the people from the shackles of poverty, raise their income, empower them, give them voice. So that is our point of view. Regarding Gawada, which is essentially a political, our point of view is that development has to be inclusive. Any development which excludes the local people, that is no development. So I empathize and sympathize with you, and again our point of view is that CPAC and the development has to be inclusive, participatory, inclusive, and the resources should go where they are most needed.
मेरा नाम वैस है, मेरा तलब भी जनूबी पंजाब से है, फ्रांस से। सर मेरा सवाल ये है कि आप स्पीकर्स को सुना है, तो आप सारे स्पीकर जो है पाकिस्तान के इकोनॉमिक फ्यूचर जो है पाकिस्तान के ग्राफ में देखते हैं, इसमें चाइना है, सेंट्रल एशिया और अफगानिस्तान है। मगर जब बात की जाए साउथ की, हमारे इंडिया है साउथ में 1.4 बिलियन पॉपुलेशन है, और इसी तरह आपने जिक्र किया ईरान का जो हमारे वेस्ट में है, लेकिन वो सैंक्शन है उनके अरेस्ट न्यूक्लियर प्रोग्राम की वजह से। मेरा सवाल सर ये है कि why you don't see Pakistan economic future in South? Just because do you think that they are hostile to us? ऐसा तो नहीं हो सकता ना कि 1.4 बिलियन पॉपुलेशन ही जो है पाकिस्तान से hostile है। So why don't you see Pakistan future in South as well? Instead of becoming part of any bloc, Pakistan should pursue its neutral policy. What is your comment on it, sir?
कह रहे हैं कि potential है पाकिस्तान का इंडिया के साथ भी, अफगानिस्तान के साथ and with Iran also. Why are you looking up north according to China? Why cannot we make potential with India, Iran, Afghanistan?
I think that's a very interesting question. I wrote a book 6-7 years ago, proposing exactly what you're saying, and I developed an economic model to calculate what kind of impact better association, better trade, better flow of people, goods and commodities among countries of South Asia will have on the economies of South Asia. I came out with not a surprising finding that the greatest benefit will be to Pakistan. Its rate of growth would increase by 2.5%. Its least benefit would be to India. Its rate of growth will increase by about 0.25%. It's pretty obvious why that is the case. India is a very large country, and opening to Pakistan doesn't do as much as it would do for Pakistan. When that book appeared, National University of Singapore said to me that I should present those findings in New Delhi, and that they would arrange 2 seminars in New Delhi at which I should present these findings. I went to New Delhi, and one of the meetings was chaired by the former Foreign Minister of India, a very senior person. And after I had spoken and some question and answer session was over, we were having a cup of coffee and he was standing next to me. And he said to me, I hope you don't mind my saying to you that you are a romantic. You think this can work? It will not work. And I'll give you the reasons why it won't work. And he gave me reasons which essentially boiled down to one sentence that I used when he had given me all the reasons why India should not have any dealings with Pakistan. I said, I forget his name now, and I said, Mr. So-and-so, what you're saying to me is that Pakistan is not an opportunity, Pakistan is a problem. And he said to me, that is a beautiful summary of what I was trying to tell you. Don't underestimate the Indian hostility towards Pakistan. They have never accepted the fact that we walked away from the Indian Union. It's very interesting that yesterday was, what was it, 70th anniversary of the Pakistan resolution. They just have not reconciled to the separation of Muslim from the mainland India, and they are still hoping that Pakistan would fail and get back into a larger India. There's an Indian historian, his name is Sunil Khilnani. He wrote a book some years ago called The Idea of India. And his argument was that India is one of the most diverse countries in the world. It has so many ethnic groups, so many languages, so many religions, so many castes, and so on. The only way it can work is what Shahid Javed was saying. Inclusive system, economically, socially, politically. And this guy, when he wrote the book, The Idea of India, he said India has succeeded in creating that kind of system, and that's why it is accepted around the world as the right political order and right economic order. Now watch what's happening in India today. Hindutva has been now accepted as the governing philosophy of the country. Joshi Adyatwa, the chief minister of the largest state of India, Uttar Pradesh, has said that if he had his way, he would change the name of Taj Mahal to Ram Mahal, and he would get his people to kill 2 million people, 2 million Muslims. That's the kind of attitude we have to live with. And you may desire better relations. I would like to see better economic relations with India, but there is absolutely, I'm telling you, I know these people, I've worked with them. Some of them worked for me when I was at the World Bank. They really do not want to work with Pakistan.
I would like to thank all the speakers for addressing the queries of students. Now I would like to invite Mr. Shahid Javed Burki, who has consented to grace this event as guest of honor. So I would like to take last question. Last question because we are in your time.
आपने जितना बताया कि चाइना पाकिस्तान के जितने भी काम कर रहे हैं एक गेम चेंजर है। सर आपको ये नहीं लगता जिस तरह से ईस्ट इंडिया कंपनियां आई थी, जिस तरह वो बाकी समाज चली गई और यहाँ पे उन्होंने उनकी इजारादारी की, ऐसा नहीं लग रहा जैसे अभी वो गवर्नर बिल इस जगह में वो कॉलोनीज बना रही, तो आपको ऐसा नहीं लगता कि ये ईस्ट इंडिया कंपनी की तरह जो हमारी हालत है वो करके चले जाए और हमने जितने भी यहाँ पे जितने भी रिसोर्स है उनको कंज्यूम कर लें और वो चले जाएं। दूसरा सर ये चलो तरक्की हो गई, लेकिन इससे जो हमारा सोशियोलॉजी के स्टूडेंट ऐसा नहीं लगता कि जो हमारे जो कल्चर है उसमें चेंजेस आ रहे हैं? क्योंकि मैं हिंदुस्तान से मुझे महसूस होता है कि जब से सीटेक बना है क्योंकि वहाँ तकरीबन उनकी कॉलोनीज बन रही हैं गवादर और जहाँ पे वो लोग काम कर रहे हैं, तो ऐसा नहीं लगता कि हमारा कल्चर है वो बिल्कुल चेंज होता जा रहा है। हम अपने जो आबाई कल्चर से तो उससे हम हाथ धो रहे हैं। तीसरा और लास्ट क्वेश्चन ये कि अभी हम कह रहे हैं कि सीटेक गेम चेंजर है, लेकिन अब जो हमारी जो पाकिस्तान की जो सबसे बड़ी इंडस्ट्री है वो गारमेंट इंडस्ट्री है, लेकिन जो चाइना वहीं जो हमारे गारमेंट्स वगैरह है उसको आधी कीमत और सस्ते दामों बनाती है। तो आप लोगों को ऐसा नहीं लगता कि जो गारमेंट्स हमारी जो गारमेंट इंडस्ट्री है, जो कॉटन इंडस्ट्री है वो तबाह हो जाएगी?
Secondly, वो ये कहते हैं कि बलूचिस्तान का कल्चर तबाह हो गया। तीसरी चीज़ वो ये कहते हैं कि गारमेंट इंडस्ट्री और टेक्सटाइल इंडस्ट्री वो बिल्कुल ख़त्म हो गया, बिकॉज इंडियन टेक्सटाइल उन्हें चीप रेट ऑफर करके कि आपकी टेक्सटाइल इंडस्ट्री में
Interesting observations, but once again, you're reading a lot of stuff that's being written about Pakistan by the Indians. I have said, I've told you what the Chinese ambassador said to me, that Pakistani people are really imbibing the Indian propaganda about Pakistan, China, and so on. But your point about Balochistan is absolutely correct. Shahid Javed has already said that we should be working towards inclusive growth rather than exclusive growth. And as I said in my opening remarks, one of the things that we analyzed is why some parts of Pakistan have been left behind other parts. And South Punjab and Balochistan were the two areas that we recognize and need to be developed. Balochistan is enormously rich in terms of minerals. I did a study for a company, a legal company that was hired by Pakistan to deal with this Tricotic problem, where Pakistan was given an award. If we had accepted that award, if we had been forced to accept that award, Pakistan would have gone bankrupt. So I was asked if I could write a report on that and say what would be the effect of that. And that's essentially what I said, that this would bankrupt Pakistan. The point I'm making is that there is an enormous amount of potential in Balochistan, but we need connectivity, we need roads, we need education, we need political development of these areas, and the government has to turn its attention to them. It won't happen unless we recognize that this is an area which is huge in size but very underdeveloped, and it needs to be developed. And that's where the government comes in, and the government should do it.
We would like to welcome our Pro-Vice-Chancellor. Sir, we would like to invite you to the stage with you. Now I'd like to invite Ms. Uzma Kardar, who is a member of Provincial Assembly of Punjab, a member
so much. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. All our esteemed and honorable guests sitting at the head table. Pro-Vice-Chancellor Burki Sahab hain, Shahid Sahab hain. I don't know the names of many, but in saalon ko मैंने जब सुना है, I'll be bilingual because यहाँ पे I think students काफी comfortable feel करते हैं if we are bilingual. ये जो आज का जो सेशन है, it was so thought provoking. मैं जब से यहाँ बैठी हूँ, being a parliamentarian, you know, I've had a lot of exposure. काफी हम लोगों ने भी experience भी है, information भी है. But as long as you live, you learn. As long as you live, you learn. और मैं अभी बैठी हूँ, मैं बर्की साहब से मैंने इनकी जो vast experience और इनका जो सारा expertise है, it is such a wealth of knowledge for us that it is I think we are lucky कि हम इन जैसे लोगों के साथ हम interact आज कर रहे हैं. और आप, you're the youth, आपको इतना कुछ इनसे सीखने को मिलेगा, इससे imbibe करने को मिलेगा, क्योंकि इन्होंने he has lived through all this. आप तो पढ़ रहे हैं, लेकिन इन्होंने जिंदगी गुजारी है इसमें सारी. तो हर एक का तजुर्बा, हर एक का एक्सपीरियंस जो है वो वैल्यू रखता है. इट्स ऑल वैल्यू एडेड आप लोगों के लिए, जो कि यहाँ पे पॉलिसी मेकिंग में आपकी ट्रेनिंग हो रही है, आपकी अंडरस्टैंडिंग डेवलप कराई जा रही है कि हाउ इम्पोर्टेंट पॉलिसी मेकिंग इज in any country's development. Having said that, एक तो मेरा जो portfolio है, it relates to gender mainstreaming. I'm chairperson standing committee on gender mainstreaming. तो आपकी जो अगली रिपोर्ट होगी, उसमें हमारी findings भी जरूर आप शामिल करें, because gender mainstreaming, gender, I think is at the core of all SDGs. आपने बाहर वॉल लगाई हुई है, आप सारों को पता है क्या होती हैं. We're all moving towards a 2030 agenda. और अफसोस तो इस बात का है कि ये एजेंडा हमें वेस्ट से क्यों आया, हमने खुद क्यों नहीं इसको अडॉप्ट किया. We should have thought of it before. हमें पता होना चाहिए था कि हम कहाँ पीछे रह रहे हैं और हमने किस तरीके से आगे बढ़ना है. लेकिन बस अब इंसान क्या इस पे बात कर सकता है. अब उन्होंने हमें कहा कि भी पॉवर्टी एलिविएशन करनी है, ये एजुकेशन पे तवज्जो दें, हेल्थ पे, ये तो वो बातें हैं जो हमारी कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन, आप पहले 28 आर्टिकल्स पढ़े अपने आइन के, तो ये तो वही फंडामेंटल राइट्स हैं जो कि हमारा आइन हर पाकिस्तानी को हक देता है. बट वी हैव फॉरगॉटन, you know, we somehow lost our focus along the way. For whatever reasons, मैं उसमें नहीं जाती. But now we have to look forward, and it is a matter of key importance, which I think our guide conveyed to us a long time back. If you don't take your 50% population with you, side by side, Pakistan can never progress. And this is true. हमारी जो vulnerable segments और marginalized segments of society हैं, उसमें सिर्फ ख़वातीन नहीं हैं, उसमें ख़वातीन हैं, एडोलेसेंट गर्ल्स हैं, उसमें हमारी ट्रांस कम्युनिटी है, हमारी स्पेशल एबिलिटी लोग हैं, ये सारे मार्जिनलाइज हैं. Women are the poorest of the poor. और एक मुल्क कैसे तरक्की करेगा अगर आपकी 50% जो पॉपुलेशन है उनको आप एक एनेबलिंग एनवायरनमेंट नहीं दे रहे हैं. अगर आप उनको अच्छा, अब एजुकेशन पे आते हैं तो मैं थोड़ी सी आपको बल्कि साफ फाइंडिंग्स जो हमारी जो हम काम करते रहे उससे हमें जो पता चलता है, डेटा जो आपने हार्वर्ड का कहा वो डेटा इधर हमारे पास है. अच्छा, दैट डेटा इज वेरी इंटरेस्टिंग. जो प्राइमरी लेवल है उसमें पाकिस्तान में देयर इज अ जेंडर बैलेंस. लड़कियां और लड़के जो हैं वो मोर और लेस आपको उसमें बैलेंस नजर आएगा. बट व्हेन यू लुक एट द सेकेंडरी लेवल, there is a drastic reduction in the girls. वो होता यूं है कि प्राइमरी के बाद whether it's poverty, whether it's insecurity, whether it's early age marriage, multiple factors हैं. कोविड ने इसको और एग्रीवेट किया कि सबसे ज्यादा प्रेशर घर पे किस पे आया, एक खातून पे, एक बच्ची पे. तो सबसे ज्यादा उसको कर्टेल किया गया और उसको मिनिमाइज किया गया, उसकी ग्रोथ को. आप हैरान होंगे कि पंजाब में हर दूसरी बच्ची स्कूल से बाहर है सेकेंडरी लेवल. हमारे सेकेंडरी लेवल के जो स्कूल्स हैं वो बहुत कम हैं. اور یہ اس میں یہاں تک ہوتا ہے کہ ہم گرل فرینڈلی ٹوائلٹس بھی نہیں بناتے ہیں. اس کی وجہ سے مینسٹرل ہیلتھ کی وجہ سے بچیاں ڈراپ آؤٹ کر جاتی ہیں. ان کو انسیکیورٹی ہوتی ہے کہ وہ باہر جائیں گی تو ریپ کا خدشہ ہوتا ہے ساؤتھ پنجاب میں خاص طور پہ. سو اب ہمیں سمجھ آ گئی ہے اس چیز کی. یونیورسٹی لیول پہ انٹرسٹنگلی اگین وی کم اپ وتھ جینڈر بیلنس. وہاں پہ لڑکیاں اور لڑکے جو ہیں ان کی بالکل جو ہے بلکہ انفیکٹ گرلز ایکسل. گورنر صاحب کی بڑی انٹرسٹنگ میں آپ کو کوٹ کرتی ہوں جہاں جاتے ہیں وہ کہتے ہیں میں ملتان گیا ایگریکلچر یونیورسٹی میں تو میں نے سوچا یہاں پہ تو کوئی میڈلس ہوں گے جو کہ لڑکوں کو زیادہ ملیں گے. فارمنگ تو زیادہ میلس ہی کرتے ہیں. کہتے ہیں کہ جب 8-10 وہ دے دیے میں نے میڈلس تو ساری لڑکیاں تھیں تو میں نے وائس چانسلر سے پوچھا بھی آگے اینی بوائز آلسو میڈلس تو انہوں نے کہا کہ تھوڑے بہت شاید آ جائے وہ بھی. تو کہنے کی بات یہ ہے کہ girls, you know, now it's the era of smart power, mind power. اب وہ brute force والی power نہیں ہے اور جو mental capabilities ہیں وہ لڑکیوں کی اور لڑکوں کی there is no difference. So they excel because they are more serious minded and they are more committed and they want to do something in life. تو یہ جو ہے ایک ہمیں سوچنا چاہیے کہ اگر ہم وہ تمام پاپولیشن جو ہماری پیچھے رہ رہی ہے سیکنڈری لیول پہ جو اسکولوں میں نہیں جا رہی ہے اس کو ہم نے کس طرح سے وہ اپرچونٹیز دینی ہے ایک انیبلنگ انوائرمنٹ دینی ہے کہ وہ بھی ہمارے. آپ کو پتا ہے کہ آپ اگر اپنی مین اسٹریم کر لیں اپنے بچوں کو خواتین کو آپ کی جی ڈی پی 10 سال میں ڈبل ہو جائے گی. That is the kind of difference which this is going to make. So میں بڑی خوشی ہوتی ہے کہ اب جس طرح سیکنڈ شفٹ سکولز پہ ہم گورنمنٹ جا رہی ہے تقریباً 7,000 کے قریب سیکنڈ شفٹ سکولز ہم نے بنائے ہیں جس میں یہ سیکنڈ چانس بچیوں کو مل رہی ہے آگے ایجوکیشن کے لیے. میں اب آئی ایم آلسو گوئنگ ٹو ساؤتھ پنجاب. میں کل جا رہی ہوں. ہم اپنی سارا طرف فوکس اب ساؤتھ پنجاب پہ بھی کر رہے ہیں. اینڈ میں آپ کو بتاؤں ابھی ڈیپ ڈائیو ہوا تھا. آپ انٹرنیشنل ڈیولپمنٹ پارٹنرز کی بات کر رہے ہیں. اس میں ورلڈ بینک ہے, اس میں ہماری یو ایس ایڈ ہے, ایف سی ڈی او ہے, کینیڈین ہائی کمیشن ہے, اے ڈی بی ہے, سارے شامل ہیں. They were all there and that deep dive was south centric because they now realized کہاں ہماری زیادہ ڈیولپمنٹ میں ہم نے فوکس کرنا ہے, اس کو اٹینشن دینی ہے. لاسٹ میں ایک بات ضرور کہنا چاہوں گی. ایز اے لیجسلیٹر when I became an MPA میں نے جا کے لائبریری میں دیکھا I was amazed. صرف بچوں خواتین اور بچوں کی پروٹیکشن کے لیے اور ان کی رائٹس کے لیے there are about 100 laws in Punjab alone. 100. بات سر یہ ہے کہ there is a huge vast gap between our laws and the implementation mechanism. There are so many laws that the rules of business نہیں ابھی تک بنے ہوئے. Policy making is so deficient. جس طرح یہ برکی صاحب کہہ رہے تھے, جس طرح تاج عزیز نے بتایا, ہماری پالیسی میکنگ میں بہت ابھی ہم نے کام کرنا ہے اور اس کے لیے ایویڈنس بیسڈ ڈیٹا بہت ضروری ہوتا ہے. اس کے لیے اب کام کرنا ہے. آپ کے پاس ڈیٹا ہوگا تو کوئی آپ ایک اچھے طریقے کی پالیسی بنائیں گے اور پھر امپلیمنٹیشن میکینزم بنائیں. ہمارے بہت سارا گیپ ہے. ہمارے جو ادارے ہیں جو کہ سروسز وہ امپلیمنٹ جنہوں نے کرنا ہے ان کی کیپیسٹی بلڈنگ چاہیے, بہت کیپیسٹی بلڈنگ چاہیے. ہم نے بنا تو دیے ہیں. وی گاٹ اے فل ویمن ڈیولپمنٹ ڈویژن, وی گاٹ آپرچ پرسن کا دفتر بن گیا, کمیشن آن اسٹیٹس آف ویمن بن گیا, سارا کچھ ہو گیا. لیکن وہ جو نیچے گراس روٹ لیول پہ ابھی بینیفیشریز کو وہ پہنچ نہیں رہا, وہ ٹرکل ڈاؤن اس کا بھی کم ہے. سو ان کو الائن کرنا ہے سب ڈپارٹمنٹس کو. اب یو کے میں جی بی وی پہ اگر کوئی مسئلہ ہراسمنٹ کا کسی کو خاتون کو ہوتا ہے, وہ ایک کال کرتی, سارے ڈپارٹمنٹ جو ہے وہ ایکٹیویٹ ہو جاتے ہیں and they do their part. اب یہاں پہ وہ انٹر کنیکٹیوٹی نہیں ہے, اس لیے وہ پھر انفیکٹ جو بیچاری ہمت کر کے کر ہی دیتی ہے کمپلین, وہ ایٹ دی اینڈ آف دا ڈے اسے انصاف نہیں ملتا. Because we don't believe in our women when they come out and say کہ I was harassed at the workplace or in a public place or whatever. Conviction rate ہمارا 1%. So آپ دیکھ لیں کہ ان ساری چیزوں کو ہم نے کیسے کاؤنٹر کرنا ہے. because we have to move forward. मैंने EU के ambassador से बात हुई, मैंने कहा आप अभी बांग्लादेश से आ रहे हैं तो मुझे आप बताएं what difference did you find there? क्योंकि I don't want to compare Pakistan to the West. हम अपने उनसे बांग्लादेश से कर रहे हैं जिनके साथ हम थे. तो कहते हैं don't mind, but I want to just मेरी एक observation थी, and that was कि वहाँ पे बांग्लादेश में there were so many women outside in public spaces. फैक्ट्रीज में जा रही हैं, यूनिवर्सिटी में जा रही हैं, ये काम के लिए जा रही हैं, बहुत. यहाँ पे पाकिस्तान में I don't see many women. So we have to provide security, safety, इदारे भी लगे हुए हैं, सब कुछ है, but हमने अब हमने इसको accelerate करना है. अब हमने ये multiply करनी है अपनी efforts. I think it's a race against time now. We have identified what the gaps are and we know what we have to do. उसमें आपका कलीदी रोल है, because you are the leaders of tomorrow. You are the architects of tomorrow and you have to be the agents of change. CPEC जो है उसके खिलाफ जो ये इंडियन प्रोपेगेंडा है, देखिए it's an era of hybrid warfare, fifth generation warfare. ये जो सारी कहानी हो रही है ना, आपको यहाँ बैठे आपके दिमाग में स्मार्टफोन के थ्रू, फॉल्स प्रोपेगेंडे के थ्रू, डिसइंफॉर्मेशन के थ्रू, फेक न्यूज के थ्रू आपके माइंड को पोल्यूट किया जा रहा है. सो यू हैव टू नो हाउ टू काउंटर दिस फिफ्थ जनरेशन वॉरफेयर. उसके लिए आपने इक्विप करें अपने आप को. ये जो आपको बातें बता रहे हैं ना, यू शुड बी अवेयर ऑफ दिस कि ये सारी इन्फिल्ट्रेशन हो रही है, इंटरनल और एक्सटर्नल. बहुत सारे दुश्मन है पाकिस्तान के. सो वी हैव टू बी प्राउड ऑफ बीइंग अ पाकिस्तानी एंड वी हैव टू मेक श्योर कि हम एक सीसा पिलाई दीवार बन के खड़े हो जाएं उन तमाम लोगों के सामने जो पाकिस्तान को कमजोर देखना चाहते हैं. थैंक यू सो मच.
Thank you, ma'am, for sharing these words. Now I would like to invite Dr. Farman Chaudhary to share his views.
बिस्मिल्लाहिर्रहमानिर्रहीम. मेरे पास 2 minutes है, तो कहते हैं कूजे में दरिया को कूजे में बंद करना, तो ये मुश्किल नहीं काम है. तो भारत, मैंने नेशनल बैंक ऑफ पाकिस्तान में 42 years डेवलपमेंट का काम किया और मेरा ताल्लुक सियालकोट से है. और तीसरी चीज कि ये जामिया पंजाब का मैं मशहूर हूँ कि मुझे रिटायरमेंट के बाद इन्होंने PhD में दाखिला दिया और मैंने 10 साल में PhD की है बिजनेस में. उसका मेन मकसद ये था कि मैं एक ब्रिज का काम करूं, मुल्क की इकोनॉमी में तरक्की आए. सियालकोट जो है वो एक रोल मॉडल है सबके लिए. ये कहते हैं कि वुमेन एम्पावरमेंट नहीं है. आप सियालकोट में देखें जाके कि वुमेन जो है वो भी बिजनेस कर रही है, एक्सपोर्ट का काम कर रही है. मोर देन $1 billion जो है वो एनुअली गवर्नमेंट को वो दे रहे हैं इन दी शेप ऑफ एक्सपोर्ट. तो बहरहाल हमारे ये डेटा नहीं है हमारे पास. हर एक आदमी कहता है कि यार ये तरक्की कर ली, ये कर ली, वो कर ली. जिस आदमी के पास डेटा नहीं है कि हमारी वीट कितनी हुई है, कितनी एरिया पे काश्त होगी, आपकी आमदन जो है वो डॉक्यूमेंटेड ही नहीं है. तो जब आपके पास स्टैट नहीं है, आपको पता नहीं कि हर एक आदमी उठता है कहता है कि इंडिया की गंदम की पैदावार जो है इतने, भाई हमारा डेटा हमें, आप में से फार्मर बैठे होंगे या जो एग्रीकल्चर में है इन्वॉल्व है, उनका डेटा ही नहीं है, फिक्टिशियस डेटा दे रहे हैं. तो भारत चाइना की इसके बारे में मेरा यही है. मेरी इस वक्त अल्हम्दुलिल्लाह 72 years एज है. तो सियालकोट से ताल्लुक है. इलामा साहब के शेर में सुनाऊं तो मजा नहीं आएगा. तो इलामा साहब कहते हैं, गरां खाब चीनी संभलने लगे, गरां खाब चीनी संभलने लगे, हमारा से चश्मे उबलने लगे. तो चीन ने तरक्की की है. हदीस मुबारका भी है, उतलबुल इल्म वलौ कान बिस्सीन, इल्म हासिल करो खा चीन जाना पड़े. تو تیسری چیز جو یہ ہے کہ ایک میرے دوست نے سوال کیا تھا کہ یہ ایسے ہو جائے گا, گلیشیئر بھی ہو جائے گا, یہ ہوگا, کچھ نہیں ہوگا انشاءاللہ. علامہ صاحب فرماتے ہیں, علامہ اقبال صاحب, تو شاہ باز فریدی اگر ان کے کہنے پہ چلیں تو کچھ کرنے کی ضرورت نہیں ہے, غار میں بیٹھے رہیں, کیا زمانہ تھا غار میں رہنے کا. تو علامہ صاحب فرماتے ہیں تو شاہ باز فریدی چراغ آفریدم, کہ اللہ تعالیٰ تو نے راگ بنائی, میں بنی نو انسان نے چراغ بنا لیا, یہ دیکھیں چراغ. تو شاہ باز فریدی چراغ آفریدم صفال آفریدی الیاغ آفریدم, اے اللہ تعالیٰ تو نے مٹی بنائی اور ہم انسان نے, بنی نو انسان نے اس سے برتن بنائے, خوبصورت چیزیں بنائی, بلڈنگیں بنائی. بیا باؤں کو سازاغ آفریدی خیا باؤں باغ آفریدی, کہ اللہ تعالیٰ تو نے تو زاغ بنائے, جنگل بنائے, صحرا بنائے. میں انسان ہوں, میں نے کیا سے کیا بنا دیا. اور من آنم کیا سنگیا عنائے سازم, میں وہ ہوں کہ جس نے سنگ سے پتھر سے شیشہ بنایا. تو اس طرح کی جو انقلابی کام ہوتے ہیں یہ ہمیں کرنے پڑیں گے, یہ ضرورت ہے. ہمارے پاس ہر چیز موجود ہے. یہ جو ایجوکیشن ہے, یہ ہماری جو ایجوکیشن کو ہم نے ہارورڈ سے ڈگریاں نہیں دی, تو ہمارے یہ جو تعلیمی ادارے تھے انہوں نے میٹرک کے بھی طلباء جو تھے پرانے وقتوں میں وہ ہارورڈ کی پی ایچ ڈی سے کم نہیں تھے, انہیں قوم کی ملک کی خدمت کی. تو اس لیے میری آپ سے یہی ہے کہ ہمارے بچے بھی جو ہیں, جو ہمیں اسلام بتاتا ہے, ہم نے ماں کی گود میں سب کچھ سیکھا ہے. وہ تبلیغ کا گھر تھا, تو ماں کی گود, باپ کا سایہ. تو اسلام نے ہمیں, آج یہی وجہ ہے کہ ہم کووڈ 19 سے ہم کو چھٹکارا ملا, کیونکہ ہم میں ریزسٹنس پاور تھی, ہم نے آرگینک خوراک کھائی ہوئی تھی, اس وجہ سے آپ بچے ہیں. تو اس لیے ہمیں ماڈرن دور پہ چلنا چاہیے. کوئی ایسی بات نہیں, یہ سب کچھ ٹھیک ہو جائے گا. ہماری پیداوار بہت زیادہ ہے, اکانومی بھی زیادہ ہے, ہر چیز ٹھیک ہے, لیکن ہمیں صرف 2-3 چیزیں, ایک ناامیدی اور ایک کرپشن. تو کوئی ایسی وجہ نہیں کہ ہم ترقی نہ کریں. رہی بلوچستان کی بات, وہ کسی دن میں آؤں گا, مکمل 2-3 گھنٹے آپ کے ساتھ لیکچر ہوگا. پھر تھینک یو.
تھینک یو, بیسٹ آف لک. اور یہ 7 پلے سے بعد کی چیزیں لے کے جانی ہے آپ نے. کوئی نیگیٹو پروپیگنڈا پاکستان کے خلاف آپ نے کاؤنٹر کرنا ہے. اچھا,
now I would like to call our Vice-Chancellor Dr. Mohammad Saleem Mazhar, who has consented to grace this event with his presence.
Shahid Javed Burki salam. हम कर रहे हैं, आ रही है आवाज, आपको भी आ रही है. शाहिद जावेद बरकी साहब, सिंधु साहब, बहुत ही मेहमानान गिरामी, मेरे मोहतरम रफ़ीक़ार और बहुत ही अजीज स्टूडेंट्स. मेरा ख्याल है सारी बातें कम बेश कही जा चुकी हैं, तो तकरार की ज़रूरत नहीं है. आप सब लोग पढ़े लिखे हैं और अंदाज़ा है आपको कि किस तरह से तरक्की पाने वाली कौमें आगे बढ़ी हैं. तो मैं आपका बहुत कम वक्त लेना चाह रहा हूँ, क्योंकि आप 11 बजे से बहुत ही इनलाइट सुन रहे हैं. तो काम अगर तवज्जो दे लें हम, तो हमारा ये तरक्की की रफ्तार तेज हो जाएगी. नंबर 1 तो ये है कि हमारी एकेडमिक कम्युनिटी, एकेडमिशियंस और वो जो फील्ड में काम कर रहे हैं, इनका बहुत ह्यूज गैप है. जो इल्म आप सीख रहे हैं, जो बातें पढ़ रहे हैं, जो तहकीक कर रहे हैं, ये कहीं लाइब्रेरियों में रह गई है. اس کو پریکٹیشنرز کے ساتھ بیٹھ کے کوئی گیپ فلنگ کرنی چاہیے. زراعت کے لوگ ہیں, سوشیالوجی کے لوگ ہیں, کئی مسائل ہیں, سوشل سائنسز کے ہیں, انجینئرنگ کے ہیں, ٹیکنالوجی کے ہیں. آپس میں بیٹھیں گے. ایک بندہ تجارت کر رہا ہے, اس کا بالکل کوئی علم ہی نہیں ہے, پرائمری پاس ہے, میٹرک ہے, مڈل ہے. اس کی جگہ اگر آپ پڑھے لکھے لوگ یہ کام کریں گے تو وہ علم آپ کو فائدہ پہنچائے گا. اس کو سادہ ترین اس میں یہ بھی کہہ سکتے ہیں کہ ہم اپنے ریسورسز کو, منی کو کنورٹ کیا نالج, اور اگلا جو اس سے اہم سٹیپ ہے ٹو کنورٹ نالج انٹو منی. اس طرف ہم جائیں گے. اس پہلو سے بہت ہی اچھا پاکستان میں اس کی بھی ضرورت ہے کہ پالیسی میکنگ ادارے ہونے چاہیے, تھنک ٹینکس ہونے چاہیے, پڑھے لکھے لوگ بیٹھ کے یہ طے کریں کہ جو آگے ہمیں وقت کے چیلنجز ہیں ان کو ہم کیسے ٹھیک کر سکتے ہیں. دوسرا جو اہم پہلو ہے وہ یہ ہے کہ ہمارے ہاں سب سے بڑی جو مسائل کی بنیاد ہے وہ جہالت ہے. لا علمی ہے, ہم اس طرف توجہ ہی نہیں دے رہے. اگر جہالت ختم کرنے کے لیے, تعلیم کی ریشو بڑھانے کے لیے حکومت کچھ سٹیپ لے لے, اس کو پہلی ترجیح بنا لے, تو بہت سے مسئلے حل ہو سکتے ہیں. ایک تو یہ جہالت کا خاتمہ کیا جائے, اس سے خود بخود کئی مسئلے حل ہو جائیں. دوسرا, بہت ہی چھوٹے دیہاتوں میں بھی ایک اچھی لائبریری بنانی چاہیے. اسٹوڈنٹس, ہمارے بچپن میں لائبریریاں تھی, لوگ کرائے پہ کتابیں لے جاتے تھے, وہ پڑھتے تھے. اب تو ڈیجیٹلائزڈ ہو گئی چیزیں, اب کوئی ہیوج انفراسٹرکچر کی بھی ضرورت نہیں. لائبریری ہونی چاہیے, اور اس کے ساتھ ہی قصبوں سے لے کے بڑے شہروں تک کھیل کے میدان بھی ہونے چاہیے, اور ان میں جینڈر بیلنس کا بھی خیال رکھنا چاہیے. لائبریری میں بھی بچے جا سکے, بچیاں جا سکیں, اور کھیل کے میدان میں بھی جا سکیں. اس سے جو رویوں میں ایک اعتدال آئے گا, اس سے معاشرہ ترقی کرے گا. یہ عجیب ہی ہم نے الٹا پہیا چلایا ہوا ہے. جہاں بھی کوئی جائیں بات کرتے ہیں کہ جی سائنس اور ٹیکنالوجی کی ترقی ہونی چاہیے. بہت ہی اچھی بات ہے, ایسا ہونا چاہیے. مجھ سے کچھ دانا لوگوں نے پوچھا کہ آپ تو سوشل سائنسز کے ہیں, آپ نے سائنس اور وہ نہیں پڑھی, تو کیسے معاملات آگے. میں نے انہیں کہا کہ میرا آپ لوگوں سے سوال ہے کہ دنیا میں کسی ایک اسٹیٹ, ملک, معاشرے کا بتائیں جس نے سماجی ترقی کیے بغیر سائنس, ٹیکنالوجی اور معاشی ترقی کی ہو. دنیا اس طرح چلتی نہیں ہے. آپ سماجی ترقی کی طرف نہیں جائیں گے, سماجی علوم کی ترقی نہیں کریں گے, جہالت ختم نہیں کریں گے, تو کوئی معاشی ترقی نہیں ہوگی, کوئی سائنس اور ٹیکنالوجی کی ترقی نہیں ہوگی. سب سے پہلے معاشرہ سنبھلتا ہے, اس کی اقدار اور نارمز ڈیولپ ہوتے ہیں, اس میں اخلاقیات آتے ہیں, ان کو توجہ, اس کے بعد ہے باقی سائنس اور ٹیکنالوجی. دنیا میں کہاں ایسا ہوا ہے؟ آپ سے بھی سب سے اساتذہ ہیں, ریسرچرز ہیں, مجھے واقعی اس سوال کا جواب اگر دے سکتے ہیں کہ دنیا میں کوئی ایسا معاشرہ ہے جس نے معاشرتی اور سماجی ترقی نہیں کی اور سائنس اور ٹیکنالوجی میں ترقی کا, ہو نہیں سکتا. یہ ایسا, یہ قانون قدرت اور فطرت کے خلاف ہے. ایک اور اہم بات یہ ہے کہ جو بھی ڈیولپ کنٹریز ہے, رفاہی مملکت ہے, اس میں سب سے زیادہ اہمیت انڈیویجول کو, انسانوں. ہمارے یہاں ہم سمجھتے ہیں ملک اس طرح سے ہونا چاہیے, باقی چیزیں ادارے بندوں کی خیر ہے, اس طرح بھی سوسائٹیاں آگے نہیں بڑھتی. سب سے زیادہ اہمیت انسانوں کو دیں, انڈیویجولز کو دیں, ان کا خیال رکھیں, ان کے رفاہ کا سوچیں, تو بات آگے بڑھ سکے گی. میں برکی صاحب کا بے حد ممنون ہوں. ہمارے ان کے ساتھ ایم او یو بھی ہے. ڈاکٹر سندھو صاحب کے ساتھ تو میرا بالکل مسلسل رابطہ اور وہ ہے. انہوں نے بہت مہربانی کی, یہ تشریف لائے. ہمیں ان سے زیادہ وقت چاہیے. یہ ان سیمیناروں میں بھی ڈسکشن ہو سکتی ہے, لیکن ہم ایک کلوز سرکل میں بیٹھ کے زیادہ ان سے رہنمائی حاصل کریں. یہ لوگ یقین کریں وہ ہیں جنہوں نے اس ملک کو بہت کچھ دیا ہے. ابھی ان کے پاس انٹلیکچوئل لیول پہ اتنا سرمایہ ہے جو آپ کی اور میری بھلائی اس میں ہو سکتی ہے. میں تھینک فل ہوں, اور سملرلی ڈاکٹر روبینہ زکریہ ذاکر صاحبہ کا بھی ممنون بھی ہوں, ان کو مبارکباد بھی کہتا ہوں کہ جو ایکڈیمک آرگنائزیشن کی ڈیوٹیاں ہوتی ہیں یہ صحیح طریقے سے ادا کر رہی ہیں, اور آپ نوجوان نسل کو سینئرز کے ساتھ بٹھا کے ان کے تجربات اور علم سے فائدہ اٹھانے کا موقع دے رہی ہیں. تو ہماری برکی صاحب سے درخواست ہے اور بھی دوستوں سے کہ ہم کسی کلوز سرکل میں ٹیچرز مل کے ریسرچرز مل کے اس کو ڈسکس کریں اور اس کے بعد آپ تک بھی یہ باتیں پہنچنی چاہیے. آپ ایک اور اہم چیز ہے, ہم بدقسمتی سے اپنے اوپر اعتماد نہیں کر رہے, یہ سب سے بڑا مسئلہ ہے. میں ڈاکٹر صاحب نے تو شعر سنا, علامہ اقبال کا ایک شعر میں ہے, وہ پرشین لینگویج میں ہے. علامہ اقبال نے کہا ہے کہ منکر حق نزد ملا کافر ہے, جو اللہ کا انکار کرتا ہے یہ مولوی کے نزدیک کافر ہے. لیکن اگلا مصرع زیادہ اہم ہے, انہوں نے فرمایا منکر خود نزد من کافر ترس, جو اپنی نیگیشن کرتا ہے, جو اپنی تکذیب کرتا ہے, اپنے آپ کو ختم کرتا ہے, وہ زیادہ کافر ہے. سو اپنے اوپر اعتماد رکھیں. ہم سارے پڑھنے کے بعد یہ سوچتے ہیں ہمیں کوئی جاب نہیں ملی. پچھلے دنوں ایک انٹرویو کیا نائب قاصد کے لیے, بی ایس کمپیوٹر سائنس لوگ بھی انٹرویو دینے آئے. میں نے ان سے پوچھا کہ آپ اپنے اوپر اعتماد کر کے اپنا بزنس کیوں نہیں شروع کرتے, جاب سیکر کی بجائے جاب پرووائڈر کیوں نہیں بنتے؟ انہوں نے کوئی جواب ہی نہیں تھا. دیکھیں ملازمت بہت اچھی, لیکن یہ ایڈکشن ملازم ہونا کہ آپ ایک محدود دائرے میں ساری زندگی گزار دیں گے. اور دوسرا آپ سے ایک کوشچن اور بھی ہے, مجھے دنیا کے نامور لوگوں کی لسٹ چیک کر لیں, ان میں دیکھیں ملازم کتنے ہوں گے, 2-4 لوگ بھی نہیں. وہ لوگ ہیں جنہوں نے انڈیپینڈنٹ دنیا کے لیے کچھ کیا, اپنا بزنس کیا, اپنا کوئی کام کیا, وہ نمبر 1 ہے. آپ بھی ہمت کریں, پڑھے لکھے لوگ ہیں, کوئی اپنا کام کرنے کا بھی سوچیں. جاب پرووائڈر بنے, جاب سیکر نہ بنے. ریسیونگ اینڈ کی بجائے گیونگ اینڈ پر رہیں تو یہ زیادہ اچھی بات ہے. اس لیے ان پر غور کرنا چاہیے. وہ 2-3 لوگوں کو بھی اس کا وہ ہو گیا اندازہ, تو ہم سمجھیں گے ہماری بات کسی مثبت نتیجے تک پہنچی. کوشش کرنا چاہیے, جاب تو آپ کے لیے ہر وقت موجود ہے, لیکن ایک آپشن, ایک چانس اس کا بھی لیں کہ آپ بہت کچھ خود کر سکیں. پاکستان میں ارننگ کے مواقع دنیا کے کسی ملک سے زیادہ اچھے ہیں. مادر پدر آزاد ہے, کسی سڑک پہ کوکا لگا لیں پتہ چلتا ہے, پوچھتا ہی کوئی نہیں. تو یہ تو کہیں بھی نہیں ہے. ایک لائسنسنگ ہوتی ہے, ایکریڈیشن ہوتی ہے, اور سسٹم. اس لیے اللہ نے جو آپ کو موقع دیا ہوا ہے اس سے فائدہ اٹھائیں. اس ایکسچیکر پہ ہم سارے لوگ ایک اچھی آرگنائزیشن میں پڑھے ہیں, کام کریں. اس کا پے بیک کرنے کا طریقہ یہی ہے کہ ہمت کریں, اپنا کنٹریبیوشن دیا. تھینک یو.
Thank you so much, sir, for sharing these wise words with us. Now I would like to call Dr. Mohammad Ijaz Sandhu, who is Director at BIPP, Pro-Vice Chancellor.
ووٹ آف تھینکس سے پہلے 1-2 باتیں میں بھی کرنا چاہتا ہوں, کیونکہ گلگت بلتستان کا کافی ذکر ہوا, گلیشیئرس کی بات ہوئی. میرا کیونکہ تعلق اسپیس ٹیکنالوجی کے ساتھ ہے. سیٹلائٹ کے تھرو تو ہم ڈیٹا دیکھتے ہی ہیں, لیکن فزیکل جو چیز ہے, میں 86 میں پہلی دفعہ گلگت گیا. گلگت, کرتوز, ہنزا, نلتر. اس وقت جتنی گرینری تھی, جتنا وہ خوبصورت تھا. اس کے بعد 2002 میں گیا, کافی کم ہو گیا. پھر ابھی ریسنٹلی اکتوبر اور دسمبر میں 2 چکر اور لگا کے ہیں, کیونکہ ایک پروجیکٹ پہ کام کر رہا ہوں ہیلتھ سسٹم کے ڈیجیٹلائزیشن میں. تو اگین اب ہم نے وہاں پہ جو گرے اسٹرکچر کھڑا کیا اور گرینری کم کر دی. گلیشیئر پگھلنے کا تعلق, گلیشیئر ختم ہونے کا تعلق اس چیز سے, اس کا سی پیک سے کوئی تعلق نہیں بنتا. مجھے حیرت ہوئی تھی اس کوشچن کے اوپر کہ سی پیک نے گلیشیئر ختم کر دی, کیونکہ میں اتفاق سے یہاں کے بعد یورپ گیا تھا, سوئٹزرلینڈ دیکھا اور کنٹریز دیکھے, ان کی خوبصورتی دیکھی, لیکن جو خوبصورتی ہمارے پاس ہے وہ کہیں بھی دنیا میں. ہمیں اس کو ضائع نہیں کرنا چاہیے. ہمیں زیادہ سے زیادہ ان علاقوں میں درخت لگانے چاہیے. کریم آباد اور ہنزا کے علاقے میں جتنا ہم نے ہوٹلس بنا کے گرے اسٹرکچر کھڑا کر کے تباہ کر دی ہے اس کی خوبصورتی, تو گلیشیئر پگھلنے کی وہ وجہ ہے, سی پیک بالکل نہیں. تھینک یو. ناؤ ووٹ آف تھینکس اسپیشلی ڈاکٹر روبینہ زکر, جنہوں نے ہمیں انوائٹ کیا کہ ہم آگے اپنی لانچنگ یہاں کریں اور آپ کے ساتھ اپنا نالج شیئر کریں, اور پنجاب یونیورسٹی کا اوور آل MOU ہمارے साथ है। अच्छा, डॉक्टर रुबीना ज़ाकर ने 2-3 बातें की थी, मैं अश्योर करना चाहता हूँ कि वी आर रेडी फॉर दैट कोलैबोरेशन, रिसर्च के भी पॉइंट ऑफ व्यू से और इंटर्नशिप के भी पॉइंट ऑफ व्यू से, दोनों चीज़ों में। और उसके अलावा भी हमारी मीटिंग काफ़ी पेंडिंग है पंजाब यूनिवर्सिटी के एंड से, हमारे एंड से नहीं। हमने 2-3 दफ़ा रिक्वेस्ट नोट की है कि इम्प्लीमेंटेशन ऑफ MOU की मीटिंग की है, तो वो अब पंजाब यूनिवर्सिटी जैसे ही वो अरेंज करेगी उसमें हम फर्दर उस पर डेलिब्रेट कर लेंगे कि किन किन एरियाज में फर्दर हमें कोलैबोरेशन करना है। सो वंस अगेन आप सबका भी शुक्रिया कि आपने पार्टिसिपेट किया और डिस्कशन में, और स्पेशली क्वेश्चन आंसर सेशन बहुत अच्छे थे और एनलाइटिंग थे, और उनके आंसर भी आपने देख लिए। मेरी तरफ से स्पेशली शाहिद जावेद बरकी इंस्टीट्यूट ऑफ पब्लिक पॉलिसी की तरफ से आप सबका बहुत शुक्रिया, और डॉक्टर रुबीना ज़ाकर खास तौर पर और डॉक्टर मदरसी।
इम्प्लीमेंटेशन वाला चैप्टर है वो, एक तो ये कि पेंडेमिक, दूसरा बरकी साहब बैरून मुल्क ऐसे ही है। हाँ, अब मुझे नहीं पता चला सर कब वापस आए हैं, अब आज मुलाकात होगी तो अब इसको जल्दी पेंडिंग नहीं रहे।
थैंक यू सो मच डॉक्टर एजाज साहब, सब लोगों का तो बहुत शुक्रिया, बट उसके साथ ही मैं डॉक्टर साहब का और अपने स्टूडेंट्स का जिन्होंने हमें हेल्प की, ACS और CBS के स्टूडेंट जिन्होंने हेल्प की इसको ऑर्गेनाइज कराने में, उनको भी थैंक्स कहना चाहूँगी। और उसके साथ मेरा स्टाफ जिसमें इमरान है और नसीम और अनस, इन्होंने हमें बहुत हेल्प की, सो थैंक यू सो मच।